So let's talk. Hello, welcome to Let's Talk. I'm Salley Gibney. My guest today is an amazing woman, Lisa Cueman. Hello, Lisa.
Hello,
Thank you
Sally.
for being here. Lisa is someone whose photographs, well, when you look at them, you just are so filled with joy and memories and peace. Lisa is a fine arts equine photographer who captures the essence of the horse. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Tell me, what is it about the horse?
Well, beyond its immediate beauty and poetry and motion, it's really, I don't know that I can really put it in words. I hope that my photographs sort of take the place of words.
Oh, and they do. They truly do. Now tell us about you. Tell us about your childhood and how you got to Vermont. And
well, I grew up in Bermuda, and as I've gotten older, I realize how much of that upbringing and lifestyle and overall freedom that I experienced as a child has influenced my visual sensibilities. And I grew up in a pretty carefree environment.
Really?
I had a lot of liberties as a kid. I grew up with horses. I had my own horse. Spent my childhood riding on the beach.
Oh, wow. I can
riding
just see that, riding on the beaches of Bermuda.
Yeah, riding on the roads to a horse show. I had a boat, a little Boston whaler that it was sort of a rite of passage in sort of a marine environment that kids would get boats, and was given a little 15-foot Boston whaler. It was a hand-me-down from my brothers, and had a 15 horsepower.
I was going to ask you.
15 horsepower, so nothing terribly dangerous, but I was given what seemed like a huge space of freedom in which I could go exploring in my boat, and often did, all by myself. So
really?
It was.
And the beaches there are so spectacular.
They are. They're beautiful.
That's my favorite place in the world. But then, and so you rode a lot, as a child.
Yeah, it was the only thing that I wanted to do.
Did you ride bareback?
I did, bareback, with a halter and rope.
Oh, wow.
And,
on the beaches?
On the beaches, and occasionally I would sneak onto the golf course. Because Bermuda is not, there's 22 square miles of land, and the golf courses presented the biggest open space that we were allowed. So every once in a while,
I'm sure the golfers weren't too happy about that.
Off I go, and just, oops.
I'm sorry.
So,
but that's so neat. So then how long did you stay in Bermuda? What was your child?
I've been in Bermuda. I was in Bermuda until my early 30s, and apart from education in the United States.
You went to college here?
I went to college in the U.S., and I spent the 4 years of high school in the U.S. I'm very fortunate in that I have dual citizenship. I'm a British citizen and an American one as well. So that's afforded me the freedom to kind of be able to pick where you wanted to be
and what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
So when you left Bermuda then, where did you go?
I left Bermuda actually on an ocean liner.
Really?
With my horse. We traveled to Canada. And the idea was to, at the time, I was taking a year off from work.
And what kind of work did you do?
I was actually in banking.
Oh, wow.
Working in the private banking department, sitting behind a desk, which is hard to believe.
That must have been hard for you.
You know, it actually was okay because I was in a windowless room.
Oh.
Which allowed me to not realize what I was missing all day.
Just focusing, yeah.
So, and I worked with a great group of people too.
Oh, that's great.
So
here you are, going off on this ocean liner with your horse.
With my horse.
Did you know anyone in Canada?
I did. I had a trainer that I was going to end up with, and my goal was to really just saturate myself in the horse world, and I did, and it was a lot of fun. 1 year turned into 3 years.
Wow.
And I had a lot of great memories from that time period. It just
So how did you saturate yourself into the horse world?
I worked in the horse world. I basically exchanged labor for lessons and the cost of my horse. So I did anything and everything.
Did you show?
I
Were you
showed,
showing?
yeah. I showed in Canada, and I showed in the winter circuit in California 1 year.
Wow.
So, and did the
Did you do jumping or?
the amateur owner jumper division,
Wow.
which was quite a bit lower than what you see nowadays, but that's what it was called at the time. So,
Oh, that's
and it was really, I loved every minute of it, and it really sort of satiated that desire to compete, and it was a great opportunity for me. You know, I was single and didn't have any commitments.
No ties.
No ties.
You know, I wanted to now. How does photography fit into this?
So photography has always been, you know, lingering in the background. I started photography in high school. I absolutely fell in love with it. I was a darkroom junkie.
Really?
I was editor of the yearbook. I spent a couple of summers working as a photographer's assistant. So it was really, you know, I really grabbed it in my high school years. And then...
Now, were you photographing horses then?
No, I was learning the process. I love black and white. I mean, and it was far more interesting to me than, you know, pursuing color. And you know, it was interesting enough when I started picking it up again and learning sort of the whole digital aspect of it all.
Because it had changed so over
It
the
had.
years, yeah.
This was film,
Wow.
and my starting point, and the darkroom and chemicals, and then as I found I had, you know, I had a period of time where I had more time to sort of explore photography. I started picking it up again, and you know, my early pictures went right back to black and white. It was just sort of
It was just part of
an
you.
instinctive reaction to what was already there and sort of locked up from high school. But I just went right back to it. It was really kind of interesting to me that
it was there, waiting in the background. So how did you get to Vermont?
So after 3 years in Canada, I really needed to sort of re-enter what I called the real world and get back to making a solid living. I was tired of being poor, ultimately. And so I came back I landed in Vermont because it was my grandmother bought a house in Vermont, in Manchester, in the late 50s. And so it was somewhat familiar. We would come up here as a family from Bermuda for Christmas. So
it wasn't totally new to you.
It wasn't totally new to me. I at the time of coming here, I arrived in a tractor trailer, 18-wheel tractor
With a horse?
trailer. No horse.
No horse.
I had retired my jumper at that point. And an 18-wheeler backed into my grandmother's driveway in Manchester Village, and out I came with a bed and some suitcases, all my worldly possessions, and watched the...
Was your grandmother there at the time?
No, the house was empty. It was in September, and I watched the tractor trailer pull out, and I go, oh my gosh.
What have I done?
I don't know anybody here. What am I going to do? And, you know, it just kind of evolved from there. I did go back to school for a little while and got into personal fitness, because so much of what I was doing, even though I was training a horse, I was
training yourself as well.
Training myself and training my horse to be as strong and fit as possible, and that started to pique my interest in fitness and health, and I needed to be fit and strong and healthy, and so that all got incorporated into in those 3 years of learning how to sort of bring out the best in my horse and how to be a good, solid, strong rider at the time.
The best you could be.
Yeah.
Because you had to be as strong as the horse, really.
Yeah.
You know,
Because
to
it's
be
a
able to do
partnership.
this. Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
So that piqued my interest. I knew the only thing, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do, but I know what I didn't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went, you know, started there and just kind of went forward.
You always had a faith, didn't you? Kind of a trust that whatever, it was going to work out.
Yeah, you know, I had always in the back of my mind, you know, what's the worst that can happen? So I go back to Bermuda.
I love that. What's the word? You know, that's something that we should all think once in a while, because we all get kind of locked into this. Well, what could happen? But what is the worst that could happen? So how did you get to photography and the horses? And
so when I got going with a personal training business, and I started to pick up my camera again, and I went back to the Maine photographic workshops to start exploring the whole...
That's in Maine, the state of Maine.
State of Maine. And started exploring all the nuances of digital.
Which had to have been huge.
Which was, you know, I mean, I didn't even know what the word RAW meant, which is a file format that photographers use.
Because you had been in the the dark room.
Yeah, I knew what 35 millimeter meant. That was
Sure.
about, that was it. And so I explored a lot of different ways of the digital photography, and you know, just was photographing anything. And I started taking some internships with a number of photographers, and one of them was long distance. It was a 6-month program with a photographer who was actually a humanitarian photographer, so not fine art photographer or somebody who's even in the same field, but I loved his feel of his work, and so I learned a lot from him. I started to learn the language of photography, and he really helped shape my vision and focus onto a specific area, because he, you know, as he was saying, you know, have you ever thought about streamlining what you do? And I hadn't, and he said, well, you know, you might want to think about that. And he said it to me very simply. He goes, what is it that you love the most? And it was an immediate response on my part. It was horses.
Yeah.
And that is when I started just honing in on one subject.
Oh.
And it started from there, and we were lucky enough to have this great horse show that comes into town every summer for 6 weeks, and it provided, you know, a great starting point for my work.
Oh, so that's where you really got back into photography. Those were the horses that you started photographing.
And that's where I started trying to find my style, because one of the things as a photographer, I mean, everything's been photographed.
Yeah.
How do you take the subject and make it your own? You know, how is it that you, you know, try and capture something that it hasn't been captured?
Sure.
That
and
you
that's
don't
kind of,
see every day.
Yeah, and that's kind of scary, isn't it? I mean, it's like, how do I do this? How do I make it different? How do I make it mine?
And in the back of my mind, I didn't want to be taking a picture that everybody else was taking.
Right.
So that was where I started from. I mean, and it's hard. I mean, it's always there. How do you take something that's been photographed a gazillion times
And make it yours.
and make it different?
Yeah.
So
and
that
better.
people take
or
notice.
make
and make it mine.
Now, how did you get to the Outer Banks?
So my work in the Outer Banks, I had started along this path of photographing horses, and I had been going out west, taking some photography workshops with photographers out west, and they were working with the wild horses out there. And that was really what started opening my eyes to a whole new genre, you know, the wild horse as opposed to the domestic horse. And I fell in love with the experience of being in the wild. And so in following that, a friend brought the attention to me about this photographer who also leads workshops in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and they have an abundance of wild horses on their coastline.
Wow.
And so I signed up with him and we started at the northern end of the Outer Banks and worked all the way down to the southern end. And they're different environments that these horses live in.
Wow.
And they're all beautiful, but what really captured my heart and soul was the southern part.
Really?
Where these horses live off the mainland on these barrier islands and have for hundreds of years. I mean, they have a lineage that dates back to the settlement of America.
Really?
And they're in the journals of the Spanish Mustang. And they, it's, when you think about that and you think about that they're still preserved.
And how does that happen with obviously there are people who live around there or whatever, and they've sort of...
they have really, the state of North Carolina was very early on the forefront of preservation. I think they saw the value of having such a, allowing space for these horses, because it's
such a heritage, really. It's
absolutely, and it's unique. I mean, the environment's unique. These horses, I mean, they live and thrive in and around the ocean, which is not typical.
And these are your two loves.
Yes.
Water and horses.
It is, and that's...
And so here you are back home again, almost.
It's all come full circle,
Yeah.
and it is really, I'm never happier than when I am standing in my waist or my shoulders with my camera gear and wild horses. I mean,
well, you know what? We have your wonderful video, and I would love to share it with our audience because it touches me. I've watched it over and over again, and I absolutely love it. So we'll just show it now, and then we can talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. I'm often asked, why horses? And the answer for me is quite simply because horses are my passion. I have no memory of when they were introduced to me, just that they've always been part of my life. And so it just seems to make perfect sense. I believe that a lot of our fascination with the horse stems from its form, its size, its beautiful lines, its grace. And for me, trying to capture those elements individually in context to their environment is really at the heart of my work. My goal is for you to see the horse as if for the first time, and perhaps in a way that you've never considered. Framing the individual elements of the form in relation to the environment is at the core of my work. While there are many traditional photographic records of horses that exist, I would like to feel I put forward a more contemporary interpretation, one that draws your attention to shape, line, and gesture. I think Winston Churchill put it very succinctly when he said, "There's something about the outside of a horse that is good for the inside of the man."
Oh, Lisa, that was absolutely wonderful. Every time I see it, it absolutely just, I don't know, as I was saying early on, the wonder and the peace. And
yeah, it's
just
a special, it really is very special. And I think there's a quietness, there's a peacefulness, there's a sort of a rejuvenative quality about it.
Uh-huh. How has it evolved for you? Or I mean, each time you go back, how is it different? How do you find it changing?
Probably the most obvious change are all the newborns that have sprouted that I've maybe seen. I saw the year before for the first time, and now they're a year older. And they're always an absolute delight. I mean, who can resist a foal, or a colt or a filly or a yearling, and it's just every time I go back, I come with a knowledge base that informs my ability to move forward. And it really, I'm familiar with maneuvering. It's not easy.
I was just going to say, your
maneuver.
Experience with the horses has helped you immensely in knowing when to move, when not to move, how to, I would think.
And it's not easy to move around. I mean, I hire a guide to work with that maneuvers the boat, and often that is how I can get close enough. So I literally do jump overboard with my gear. And most of the time, I mean, I'm wading to wherever I need to go. And then the islands certain islands have these huge oyster beds.
Oh, wow.
And when the tides rise, you can't see those oyster beds.
You have to be careful.
So
they're pretty sharp.
Yeah, and the horses actually walk right over them.
Oh,
it's
wow.
quite extraordinary.
They're used to it.
They've adapted to that. And the one thing I've learned is to follow the horse trails, because they will find the easier route.
Sure. And also crush some of those shells.
Yeah, and also they know where the solid ground is. When the tide is covering the land, which it does in high tide by anywhere between 6 inches to a foot.
Wow.
I watch where the horses are walking. And
do the horses, do you think they remember you? Because you have come back.
I don't think so.
No.
Because I do.
Ideally, I would think yes.
You'd love to think that, but I am very careful not to interact with them. You don't want to get them so used to human human presence that they
feel safe
are
with them.
blasé to humans, because unfortunately humans do some very silly things, not understanding that a wild horse is very different from a domestic horse.
That's amazing. Now, we have shown your video, which is wonderful, with so many of your pictures. How do you capture that? How do you know when to shoot? How do you, I mean, your pictures are just so unbelievable, and it's, how do you do that?
It's, it's very much an intuitive response. It's not something it's not a hard thought. It's, I intuitively respond to a visual. And it's just, I try and position myself. And again, after being down there and being down there for long periods of time, I start to understand their movements. And so I try and position myself with the hope of anticipating some interaction.
But the positions that you capture are just amazing. You know,
Well,
I'm like, well, how did you know to press the button at that time? You know,
it's not. For me. It's completely intuitive. It's a feeling, and a know-how of how horses are going to interact. It's knowing your subject ultimately, but at the other, I think what makes those images mine is my intuition, which I can't explain other than it's a culmination of my life with horses and my visual. I mean, I've always loved art, and Bermuda is spectacular. Is just visually spectacular in its color and the shape of the buildings, and I've always enjoyed a very modern sensibility to art, and I think you see that perhaps in some of my shots that aren't from the Outer Banks as much, where they're abstracted more and are parts of a horse.
And people love this, don't they? I mean, there's something about, any child, girl or boy, who have ever ridden and had some kind of a connection with a horse, just absolutely love them. I mean, there's something about, what is it about the horse that draws all of us in, that there's something so special about that?
I think they have a way of just, I don't know, they're just such a spectacular, they have such presence. They're these big giant animals, and they have such gentleness to them. They can be wild, they can be tame, they can be strong, and they can be very timid. And I think they really
get into your
comfort,
soul.
Yeah, they comfort us. I mean, it's and it's different for different, for everyone, what they really mean.
What they mean to them.
But the one thing that's really kind of interesting as I'm sort of going along this path is that the people who buy my work are not necessarily horse people.
Really?
They are people that have had connections with horses, perhaps, or have always wanted a connection with a horse, and they find there's something in what I've captured that they really connect with. And I find that really exciting because, that is sort of extending the reach that the presence of a horse can have. And it's very touching to me when that happens.
And in doing what you're doing and sharing the story of the horses in the Outer Banks and the wilderness, you really are, in a sense, preserving them as well.
Yeah. I mean, that is the magic of photography, is capturing something for eternity. And it's a moment, and for me, it's always a great way to transport me back to the Outer Banks, particularly sometimes in the deep winters of Vermont.
I think that I want to thank you for your work, because it really does, it gives me great joy. And I know that for our audiences too, it captures that certain something inside that I can't really put my finger on.
Thank you.
But it's very, very special. And having you here has been just such a joy. It's really been a gift to me as well.
Thank you.
And I know that I'm sure that our audience will feel the same way. And for all of you out there, isn't this wonderful? Didn't you love the video and the pictures? Oh, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I want to thank you so much, Lisa, for being here. And all of you out there, go take a look at Lisa's work at Helmholtz Fine Art Gallery. You'll be just so taken by it. And that's it for today. So until next time, keep talking.